Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Clean Tech panel during the Canada-EU Business Tech Day. It gives me great pleasure to be hosting and moderating this very special Clean Tech panel, which I find is very timely with respect to everything that's going on, in the technological space, as well as innovation and foreign direct investment. My name is Omar Alam. I am the Chief Executive Officer of global trade consultancy Alam Advisory Group. I also want to take this opportunity to thank the European Canadian Chamber of Commerce, EU-CAN, as well as all the partners that are here today. One thing for you is that we really want to make this interactive, okay, as much as possible. So we're going to ensure that there's enough time at the end of the session for questions and answers. So we're hoping that you can input a lot of your questions during the Q&A section. And for those of you that are not attending this session or want to weave back and forth during other panels, this is going to be recorded, so it'll be made available later. In a moment, I'm going to take the opportunity to introduce our wonderful panelists that come from a wide array of backgrounds that will provide a great lens in terms of the potential explosive growth opportunity, not only in Canadian and EU innovation, but also those that will be able to share their lessons, their experiences, challenges, and pathways forward for potential collaboration. So we have 5 speakers in this great panel. So first we have Cyril Dufault-Sansot. He's the CEO and founder of Hy2gen Group, and they design and finance, build, and operate 100% carbon-free hydrogen production and hydrogen-based bioproducts facilities around the world. Cyril is going to have approximately 7 minutes, along with the other speakers, and we're going to keep it very short in terms of, very tight and concise. So if you do hear a bell like this, it's not your doorbell ringing. It's not FedEx or DHL knocking on your door. It's just me giving a heads up to the speakers that they have 1 minute left in their lap in terms of being able to provide additional input during their presentation. So without further ado, Cyril, I'd like to welcome you to the podium, the virtual podium, to speak to emerging trends, challenges, and opportunities that you see as we look to bridge further collaborations, deepen further investments between our various economies. So with that, Cyril, over to you.
Thank you, Omar, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to present our experience in the relationship between EU companies and Canada. I prepared some slides. I will skip some of them to make it short, but I hope you can see my screen now. And first of all, just to introduce Hy2gen company. So Hy2gen is a company that has been developed on a commitment to change and to change the energy by bringing cleaner energies like green hydrogen to the world at industrial scale by using the electrolysis process to split water into hydrogen and oxygen with renewable electricity to produce green hydrogen. And obviously, Canada, especially Quebec, is a great location to get access to green power at an affordable cost to make it happen. But speaking about industrial scale of green hydrogen production requires to explain how to use this hydrogen. And the way we do it is to produce with this hydrogen renewable fuels or clean fuels that can be produced at scale and enable the implementation of industrial scale hydrogen production and facilities. So why doing green or clean fuels is to decarbonize the mobility sectors and the heavy duty mobility sectors like maritime shipping, like aviation sector, and obviously road transportation, but not replacing conventional fuels by hydrogen, but by giving the opportunity for road transportation to blend green fuels into conventional fuels, just to enable a new path to CO2 reduction or CO2 emission reduction. Our main target is the maritime sector, And you see here on the slide at the left, the fuel switch from maritime sectors to clean fuels like ammonia, based on this assumption that we need clean fuels. We also need new regulation to enable the use of clean fuels. And Canada has decided a few weeks ago to write in the stone that a CO2 tax will be applied up to $170 per ton in 2030, and it will on one side make conventional or fossil fuels less attractive, and it will push ahead clean fuels to be used. So this is what we intend to do. And this is the way we want to develop our projects, by using green hydrogen as the heart, and especially in Canada, based on mainly hydropower, or when available, wind or solar. And once we have established a viable business case, then we can also dedicate pure hydrogen for local mobility to decarbonize the use of buses, trucks, forklifts, and at the end cars. Why Canada? Just I go fast on the company because this is not the main topic here, but Canada and especially Quebec gives us the opportunity also to export back clean commodities or clean fuels back to Europe. And also we need to be aware that some of the technologies available to produce green hydrogen or clean fuels are not necessarily available in North America, but mainly in Europe. So we considered Canada as a good opportunity, also thanks to the CETA, because we can import European technologies to build up facilities in Canada, and we can export back clean fuels to Europe, where there is currently a market thanks to regulation that has been put in place in Europe. I mean, the RED II and the coming RED III, Renewable Energy Directive. So this is how we based our first projects. And now, maybe some of you may be aware about that, but Canada has also decided to go to clean fuels with a clean fuel standard or a clean fuel fund that has been announced last week to enable the use of such clean fuels also in Canada, also based on the example of the US and especially California, that has implemented the low carbon fuel standard some years ago to push ahead the use of clean fuels and clean commodities. So we benefit from a very good policy framework between Europe and Canada to develop our projects, and we are currently developing some projects in Quebec. So I go fast on the two major ones, are the most advanced one, the Energia project in the Greater Montreal area, where we partner with a big ethanol producer, Ontario-based Greenfield company, to combine their green CO2 with green hydrogen that we will produce, to produce methanol to export back to Europe to be blended with conventional fuels, or the other project on the north shore of Quebec to produce green ammonia. And yeah, I look back to the beginning of the presentation to make it available for the maritime sector, because green ammonia is one of the favorite new clean fuels for this heavy-duty maritime shipping industry, and everything based on the opportunities that are given to us by Canada and Quebec. So I think I'm at the end of my presentation, and I look forward to your questions at the end.
Cyril, thank you so much for that. It was, albeit, a quick 7-minute sprint, you're not out of breath, which is good. And my video here kind of froze. But what was good was that, and I recap, very quickly, was that you highlighted the drivers that are in place. So you've got the policy instruments that are in place, trade agreements, but also policy frameworks that not only give you confidence and enable your business to not only invest and expand, and then re-export and do business back into the European Union, but you're talking about a specific example of a geography where Canada has, a unique mix of natural resource endowments and an industrial mix of economic opportunities, which vary by region. And the same goes for the European Union. And I think, what's unique is a context-specific approach to how you support the development of clean technologies. Is unique, and we certainly hope that those in the audience will ask questions during the Q&A session, where you can further dive deeper and ask Cyril and others on the panel, how do they do this? How do they expand on this? And if we don't have enough time during the Q&A session, there will be time for after, where you can have a specific collision or a one-on-one meeting and opportunity. And I highly encourage you to do that. Without further ado, I'll stop there. I want to welcome our next speaker, Mr. Peter Hayes. He's actually just based in Ottawa, not only just a couple of kilometers away from myself, but he represents the Low Carbon Business Action of Canada. And this is an EU-funded initiative which supports the acceleration of low carbon European business in the Canadian market. So Peter, I'm going to invite you to the virtual platform here to speak to your experiences, having done business in 500 different cities around the world, and the specific project that you're working on, and dive a little deeper in terms of what it is you're doing here, and maybe share some insights and lessons learned.
You're on mute, Peter.
Peter, you're on mute, mister.
Yes, I am. There we go. Delighted to be here. Bonjour tout le monde. Oui, buenos dias. Let me add a layer of discussion to looking at business opportunities from what Cyril just presented. I am going to highlight just briefly what we do as a project, and that will give people a little bit of context about the types of business that we're engaging and then the opportunities therein. I'm going to show you let me just screen share here if I may. And please let me know when the presentation comes up, if in fact I can even find it. I'm afraid my share is not working. Can you see the PowerPoint in front of you?
No, we see a personal text Skype screen.
No, that's not what I want. My apologies.
So Peter, I don't want to throw you, throw you a curveball here, but can you multitask and tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing here, especially the accelerator?
Let me just unshare so that you're not distracted by what's on the screen.
And for everybody, just close your eyes, kind of squint, pretend that it's not even there. Okay,
there we go. Okay, yeah, my apologies for that. Look, we are LCBA, Low Carbon Business Action in Canada. We partner with a number of multipliers. We're delighted to be working in concert with EUC-CAN. And what I'd like to do is highlight just briefly some of the perspectives on how we in Canada and the EU can identify with tech companies, clean tech companies that can seize the many opportunities that are out there. And there are many indeed. So we're part of a broader program across the Americas, including Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, and of course, in our case, Canada. And we are operating with the primary objective of supporting private sector to decarbonize regional economies and promote circular economy innovation. That's between the EU businesses and Canadian businesses. The framework, of course, as Cyril had mentioned, is things like CETA. We've also got the Paris Agreement, which is in essence, a decarbonization commitment globally, and the EU Green Deal, which obviously promotes the sort of project priorities that we have. What we do, which is unique in many ways, is we connect the Canadian buyers' unmet technology and service demand, particularly where they have high pain points and the market hasn't provided them with solutions, with cutting-edge low carbon and circular economy EU supply. That's the bridging we do. We engage EU and Canadian multipliers, the financiers out there, government representatives at 3 levels. And then we engage in conversation as to how to resolve Canadian buyers' unmet demand. We also provide technical assistance in many forms, including feasibility studies, regulatory advice, financing leads and advice, Canadian market access, etc. That's to ensure that the Canadian buyer and EU seller partnership is strong. And then we have, and I'm afraid I can't show it on screen, but we have sort of a 7-step approach to ensure that that partnership is developed. So we identify the buyer's need, we formulate a very brief challenge, we open up a tender for that challenge for EU SMEs, we long list them based on a series of very basic criteria. We shortlist those EU SMEs to about 4 or 5, and then they make a pitch to the Canadian buyer based on their technology expectations. And then the Canadian buyer and EU SME draw up a joint business concept. So that's essentially the process. Now, let me talk a little bit about the market opportunity, because that's really the purpose of this panel. We've identified 7 primary markets in Canada that need attention and where business exists in grand. Oil and gas, of course, is one of the primary areas. They are in desperate need of decarbonization. We have a lot of EU solutions that we can connect to those oil and gas firms in Canada to help them reduce significantly their carbon footprints through innovative technology. Then, of course, transport is the 2nd largest sector, which has a lot of opportunity, including hydrogen, among others. Buildings, real estate, and infrastructure are looking at decarbonizing their carbon footprints and their energy platforms. Electricity sector is very big. Heavy industry, including mining, extraction, and then agriculture, agri-food, and aquaculture. And I'll give examples of those, and finally waste. So those are the 7 primary sectors that are in need of reducing their carbon footprint. Now let me give you a few specific examples of where some of the business opportunities lie specifically on the Canadian buyer side for solutions from the EU. So in transportation, including air and land, there is a pronounced need for fleet overhauls for alternative fuel utilization. That's one example for those of you who are offering your technology and services. In terms of transportation, there is a pronounced need for hydrogen supply and storage, particularly for infrastructure and vehicle electrification, and that includes rail, marine, and road. So that's in transportation. In buildings, there is almost a desperate need for low-emitting energy sources. For example, electric ground source heat pumps. Any firms in the EU that can offer that type of solution, we can help to put you in contact with the Canadian buyer. As well, there's a powerful need for renewable building materials, renewable energy for buildings, particularly district energy, etc. In terms of oil and gas, their automation operations are in short supply in Canada. Unmanned aerial vehicles for remote methane detection is a demand. Carbon capture utilization and storage, CCUS, is desperately needed across the country and in high demand. And then in the energy sector, we've got car and plant batteries, obviously, as well as accelerating renewable energy capacity. So those are some of the areas. And then finally, on the Canadian buyer solution needs, we've got chemical plastics and life recycling, hydrogen for steel production. In agriculture, there's a pronounced need for methane emission capture and utilization. And in waste, there's microplastic monitoring, and especially filtration and landfill and wastewater treatment. So those are some of the examples in those 7 core sectors. I'm going to leave you with what I think is one of the most important messages, and that is follow the money. We connect the buyers in Canada and the sellers in the EU. We also know that there are huge decarbonization funds out there, and we can list them in the discussion. I'll just highlight a few. There's the program Focus Green Infrastructure Fund in Canada. It's $22 billion worth of potential business opportunity. And the SIF, or Strategic Innovation Fund, that's $2 billion for low carbon type development. You're probably most aware that in Canada, the Fed's just announced this Net Zero Accelerator Fund for $5 billion to decarbonize the large emitters. There is a business opportunity as well. And then finally, on the EU side, we've got the 10 billion EU Innovation Fund and the 96 billion recently announced Horizon Europe initiative. So the point is, lots of business out there. There's a lot of underspent carbon funds. We connect the buyers, the sellers, and the financing, and we think we can offer a tremendous opportunity. Let's talk more about that in the discussion question and answer period. Thank you.
Peter, thank you so much. You know, it's always exciting. I think people are getting excited, you know, especially when you're hearing about money. Show me the money, where's the money? And I find in my experience that the financing isn't the problem. I think it's ensuring that you're finding the right supply and demand, you're matching the right types of technical requirements that are in place, you're understanding the culture, the nature of doing business in the market that you're trying to enter into or expand into, and it's building long-term partnerships. So it's not a quick transaction, it's long-term relationship building that you're looking at. It's building off of the government to government infrastructure that's built. Again, the drivers that are in place, the champions that are within various economies, ecosystems, building off of ecosystems and multipliers in a given market. And then from there, going after the money. So I think you raised some excellent points. And I think this is also, you know, a good segue into Ms. Jeanette Jackson's presentation. She's the CEO of Foresight, and they're a leading Canadian clean tech ecosystem accelerator. And Foresight brings together, and that might be Foresight's, you know, cheerleading squad. I don't know, but
I was just going to say, stop, please.
Maybe they're excited about the whole, you know, teaming up with government, academia, and investors and innovators to serve as a key stakeholder in Canada's clean technology transition. So with that, Jeanette, I'm going to hand it over to you and your crew back there. And
thanks.
And the virtual podium is yours.
Thank you so much, Zoe. That's enough. It wouldn't be a morning session without a good dog bark. So thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here. You know, at the end of the day, we are just really excited about all the relationships building between Europe and Canada. I think COVID has broken down so many silos and barriers, and we're seeing people willing to open up and do business differently and really tackle climate change on the outset. So a little bit about Foresight. You are correct. We are Canada's largest clean tech innovation accelerator. At the end of the day, we're here to really position all of our core competencies in Canada, essentially as global leaders in clean tech innovation, where we have those competitive advantages. Our 5 buckets of activity are acceleration, adoption, capital, exports, and ecosystem building. So on the accelerator side, you are correct. We really do lean in to make sure that the ventures are finding that product market fit. We are also the only accelerator that we've seen that offers CTO training to complement the CEO training. So making sure that while the business development and customer discovery work's being done, that the technology roadmaps and product roadmaps are aligning with what customers will pay for. On the adoption side, we too run a series of different innovation challenges, everything from light touch reverse pitches all the way up to deep decarbonization projects. We're currently running the $25 million challenge for the Clean Resource Innovation Network in Alberta. On the capital side, this is a very fluid conversation. At the end of the day, we need to figure out how to best capitalize the early stage all the way through to the scale up and export stage. And of course, there's lots of pilot and project funding components that come into that as well. I will let you know that we are launching a seed fund to support over 300 ventures that we have in our current portfolio, and with 550 ventures supported to date. So that'll be coming up soon. On the export side, just imagine all of the opportunity. 90% of our ventures do export to Europe or the US. And so we lean in with matchmaking opportunities. We do a lot of different events, which I'll chat about in a minute here as well. And then on the ecosystem building side, it's breaking down silos. We have evolved the triple helix to be called the Helix 5. So SMEs, industry, academia, government, and investors, making sure that the investor community is at the table early to understand all the dynamics of what the innovation community is doing to connect with their right industry and markets. We do take a very regional and sectoral approach. And so clean tech is now so broad. How do we break it down into bite-sized pieces so that we can do the right matchmaking with different stakeholder groups? I personally lived in Europe for 2 years, many years ago in Geneva, and had the opportunity to really learn a little bit more about how business is done there through my ongoing efforts as a CEO of a clean tech startup, long before taking over this role. But at the end of the day, since 2015, Foresight has really been leaning in with Europe. We launched our first natural resource sector challenge program, and we're looking for innovation from all over the world and connecting them to the forestry, oil and gas, and bioeconomy sector here in Canada. We've also been running SDG Connect Challenge program. Everyone's familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, wrong side. But we work with international buyers who are looking to source Canadian innovation in a very cost-effective, fast way. I don't know if Peter might comment on it as well, but we're seeing a lot of uptick on that program. And then, of course, a series of events. Last year, we ran a hydrogen CCUS and storage stream of activity that was followed up with a bioeconomy and water stream, all connecting different innovators and industry partners in Canada and Europe. The important part was that government also came to listen and provide a bit of a delegation as well to share their thoughts on how we continue to increase these relationships so that collaboration is front and center. We also ran a huge CETA event in March. In terms of our relationship, with Europe and different parties, we are members of the International Clean Tech Network, which is essentially cluster-to-cluster engagement, and Europe is the epicenter for clusters and understands that model very well. And so we're always looking to learn best practices and bring that back. And of course, with EU-CCAN, Trade Commissioner Services, Global Affairs, Export Development Canada, we always are leaning in with these different team members in each of these respective departments to figure out how do we make sure they have the tools and knowledge to know which ventures they should be promoting, what industry and finance partners to start to build relationships with. I mean, to take a step back, at the end of the day, 50% of the innovation required to meet climate targets is not yet developed. We have a lot to learn and a lot to share. And what we see is that if we just recognize our differences, so for example, in Europe, there's a lot of proximity. So things like evolving transportation and waste management and getting, in Denmark, all, the wind turbines and wind power all up and running. That whole integrated system is something that we can leverage here, but keeping in mind, we have much smaller ecosystems relative to the proximity. On the flip side, we're very comfortable with large industry. And so how do we take some of those learnings and best practices to either pull innovation from Europe or share our knowledge back the other way? If I was to put forward a few opportunities, we'd love to see more industry to industry collaboration. So we're working with, for example,
Jeanette, are you still there? Okay.
Oh, yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, you froze. Okay.
My apologies. Did I say the first part on seeing industry collaborate?
If you could just repeat that industry to industry collaboration, because I know you're very passionate about that.
Perfect. The three areas that I sort of wanted to close off with in terms of collaboration is we'd love to see more industry to industry collaboration. So we're working, for example, with the oil and gas sector here, as well as Europe, to identify common needs so that we can pool efforts and resources to tackle the path to net zero. We also see an opportunity to really lean in and share best practices. I'd say from an academic cluster and policy perspective, we have a lot to learn from Europe. And then also even broader when we think about hydrogen and CCUS and renewables and all these other points that Peter touched on, we'd love to see a few more globally integrated innovation pathways so that innovators know where to focus their time and resources, as you mentioned, Omar, on building relationships and thinking long-term about this transition. I'll hand it off now. Thank you so much and look forward to the Q&A.
Jeanette, thank you so much. I think it gives a real picture into what's happening in the Canadian ecosystem, as well as the linkages that you have and the importance that you're stressing on, building the relationships, nurturing them, fostering them, again, with the end view of the long term and ensuring that sustainable development goals are tied to those outputs, especially what it is companies are trying to do, from a sustainable development standpoint. I think that's also important. I think it excites some audience members to hear that because I think that's true and dear to many with respect to how they live and work and play throughout the world. Without further ado, I want to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Richard Surprenant. He's the Senior Vice President and CTO of CO2 Solutions, Inc. Richard successfully demonstrated the commerciality of enzymatic carbon capture with the commissioning of the first commercial capture unit in 2019. Saipem acquired the technology in 2019 as a new offer to realize the energy transition of its customers and to deploy carbon capture, utilization, and storage worldwide. Richard, with that, I invite you to the virtual podium to speak to your experience, opportunities, challenges, lessons learned, and any nuggets of gold that you can share with the audience, and hopefully to spark a conversation during our Q&A.
Okay, thank you, Omar. So welcome everyone, and I'm glad to be here today and to speak to you today. I just want to highlight Saipem's role in business. So Saipem has been in business for the last 60 years. It's based out of Italy, in Milan. We operate in about 60 countries. We have about 35,000 employees, and we deliver turnkey projects, the small, the medium, the large, the extra very large, in offshore and onshore oil and gas, which is the heart of our business. But of course, with energy transition, we see that about 60% of our portfolio in the next 10 years is going to come from energy transition offerings. And that's why Saipem acquired the carbon capture technology of CO2 Solutions, which was developed in Quebec with the help of Canadian, European, and US governments over the last 20 years. Actually, I have one slide that I'd like to share with you, because I believe it's a very key, important message why I'm so passionate about this. In the next hour, all the humans on this planet that we call Earth are going to be emitting about 3.6 million tons of CO2. And so even though we've built large carbon capture projects, so for example, Quest, I think, is about 1 million tons per year. So it took them about 3 years, 3 to 4 years to get rid of the CO2 we're going to emit in this 1 hour. In Europe and in Canada, so the emissions are about 236,000 tons in Europe and 31,000 tons in Canada. And how can I stop sharing? I stop share here. And so, so that's the sense of urgency, is that anybody's success in carbon capture is for everybody's benefit. And so that's why I think cooperation is very important between different countries, between different companies to achieve this goal. Also, as a decarbonization occurs, we must make sure that the industry is not painted with bad rep concerning failures that are of gigantic sizes, which makes the next decarbonization project more difficult. So if you're in the decarb business, I wish you the best of luck and success, because that's important. So if we look at trends in Canada and Europe, in decarb, of course, we have more electrification is occurring in a lot of processes, and you've seen companies such as Shell just recently announced that they will go into power, which is quite interesting because they're not. This is not their initial background. You also see the rise of hydrogen, green, blue, and basically going across different boundaries that we didn't expect before in industrialization. You see more carbon utilization occurring. You also see the creation of hubs for CO2 emission control and hydrogen schemes occurring, specifically in UK, Norway, lots of the other countries around Europe, and some of them near Varennes, for example, which is starting to become a hub. The integration of renewables is in industrial developments is also really rising. You see more and more solar, wind, tidal, geothermal being discussed in 2 large industrial projects, which goes in the right way. And you also see hybridization, which means that, for example, we will have a conventional type of process to make a molecule, let's call it methanol or urea, but in which we will also add green hydrogen to make green ammonia, and therefore we can decarbonize that process somewhat. Also, you see that hard-to-abate industries are really aggressively tackling the decarbonization. They realize that as the future within the next capital cycle, which typically, you know, when you build a plant, it's going to be there for 30 to 50 years. In the next capital cycle, this is when they need to change significantly their carbon footprint for the 2050 objectives to be met. So all of these are very good, let's say, directions that the industry and the governments are taking, but also the support of governments is key to that development. So it's time for a lot of those technologies to move from the research lab to the engineering field. And as I'm a very pragmatic person, if I can see on this map where the problem is, give engineers, you know, funding and enough funding, and they will solve the problem. So that's very encouraging from my perspective. Now, experience in doing business, I thought this was a very interesting question because I had to reflect on, you know, how could CO2 Solutions, through its research, arrive to where it was at. And actually, what I did is I looked at the press release directory of all the press releases we've made, and actually I can come to the point where, you know, the evolution of technology, and it's valid for us, but I think it's also valid for anybody who's in the technology development field, comes from a number of discussions and meetings where you know, you've spoken to competition, or you've spoken to natural allies in your value chain, or you just had some freak conversation with a company you didn't know of before, and then you realize that you have common ground on moving towards something that would be good for either mutual interests or also for something that we're not into right now, but it would be quite interesting. And so this allowed us at CO2 Solutions to talk with companies in the US, in different provinces, in Canada, in companies that are based out of Europe. And through those discussions, it allowed us also to get more funding from governments, because now it's not only the Quebec government who's interested into your project, or the federal Canadian government who's interested in your project, but also a government, maybe the US Department of Energy, or a European country that is interested into your project. And that gives you more fuel to progress the technology and eventually make it to something that is developed. And so so I think that's my my 2 bits. So I think just a closing remark, I think you make more friends than foes, and as a general remark, because this will be helpful in the end for your technology if you're growing it, and also eventually you end up being part of a company that has more global outreach, which is the case that of our story here at CO2 Solutions. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a good conference, and hope to hear lots of good questions.
Richelle, thank you very much for that insightful presentation. It really gives kind of a different lens in terms of the work that you're doing, but also the types of business that you're doing, and gives kind of you know, the advice, you know, don't make enemies, make friends, but again touches on the partnerships and the long-term relationships. Last but not least, we have Peter Boer, who's joining us from Berlin. He's with the Canadian Trade Commissioner Service of Global Affairs Canada. He joined the Trade Commissioner Service in 2015, and in January 2018, He was appointed as the Regional Trade Commissioner for Clean Technology, responsible for Europe. In this role, Peter helps Canadian companies find opportunities in the European market, as well as assisting European companies that are looking to scout and scope for Canadian clean technology solutions. So Peter, with that, I hand the virtual microphone over to you to share your experience and the work that you're doing.
Yes, thank you very much, Omar, and thanks to the EU Canada Chamber for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be part of this very interesting, varied panel. And thanks as well, Omar, for highlighting sort of the role that I play here within the Trade Commissioner Service. So I work with about more than 30 Trade Commissioner colleagues all over Europe, focusing on clean tech. Before I get to some other points, let me just pick up on two things that were mentioned previously. Jeanette mentioned the SDG Connect challenges that they organize, in many cases in collaboration with the Trade Commissioner Service. It's an excellent instrument that we've seen that works really well to connect Canadian major European players with Canadian companies, especially SMEs. And we've actually done that with Saipem, who's on the panel today, and most recently with Vestas in Denmark, where we managed to link up with, in terms of this cooperation with Foresight as well, to link up two Canadian SMEs with Vestas. So that's a real win-win situation and a great way of doing business. Just to pick up on CETA, that's been mentioned quite a few times, of course, in this kind of context. And beyond the fact of zero tariffs and access to government procurement, I just wanted to highlight one or two other aspects. First of all, that at a time of change and some insecurity caused by the pandemic and other things where people are looking at their supply chains, it's very useful to have the kind of security that agreement brings. It's also a great benefit to have it so clearly incorporated that we are like-minded regions with a similar approach to the ESG issues that are becoming more and more important these days. And lastly, let me just mention that, of course, the EU is a fiercely competitive market, but at least CETA gives us an important advantage over some of our major non-EU competitors, including the US and China, who are responsible for about half of the non-EU imports into the EU. So if we talk about clean tech in Europe, of course, the EU policy framework is a major driver of demand. That is clear. The EU Green Deal, I think, is well known by now, with the headline goal of making Europe the first continent to become carbon neutral by 2050. So that was a very clear signal, also a competitive signal. And we see that companies are reacting, are aligning accordingly to enable them to reach that goal. Besides that, in response to the pandemic, we see the next generation EU spending of around 750 billion, with a major part of that going to the green transition and digital transformation, as we've heard before. So that framework is very clear, but it's not just the long-term goal that is driving demand, but there are also some shorter-term targets. We know that the EU has made significant progress, of course, in increasing the share of renewables in the power mix, and that's likely to continue. But some of the other major sectors, including transportation, construction and heavy industry, the chemical industry, steel industry, have really been lagging behind, like in other parts of the world. So the focus has definitely shifted to these hard-to-abate sectors and what we can do about that. In addition to that, there are so many things increasing the pressure on companies and increasing the incentive for companies to look at clean tech. And a part of that is, of course, the more ambitious goals that the EU has set for 2030. They recently ramped up those to increase the 2030 target to 55% reduction compared with 1990, compared with the previous target of 40%. So we're not just talking about vague targets several decades from now, but in 9 years' time, reaching those very specific targets. In addition to that, we have stakeholders, shareholders, civic society, everybody putting pressure on companies and demanding that these goals should be met. To mention just a few examples to add to the story, two recent court cases. This week we saw a court in the Netherlands ordering Shell, the oil major, to reduce their emissions by 45% by 2030. Shortly before that, we saw the German Constitutional Court ordering the German government to spell out in more detail their targets for getting to carbon neutrality by 2050 beyond 2030. And that was seen as a major case of intergenerational justice. And in response, the German government has actually already now put out more detailed targets, including a more ambitious target of reaching carbon neutrality by 2045 and a 65% reduction by 2030. Then we have seen the ETS, so the emission trading system in Europe, the price shooting up to 56 euro per ton in this month. And then, of course, Germany, as the leading economy in Europe, also introducing a carbon tax at the beginning of this year for gasoline, diesel, and heating oil. That's starting at 25 euro a ton, going up to 55 by 25. And after that, the idea is to have it integrated into an ETS-like system. So Europe is also working on something like that. So it's very clear that all of this is really focused the mind, added a sense of urgency, but it's definitely also opened up the debate about the kind of technologies that we need to reach those goals. And this is where Canada also comes into play, because it's clear that although solar, wind, and electrification will be at the heart of this process, Europe is not going to reach those goals by doing that alone. So there's definitely been a lot more focus recently on hydrogen, on negative emission technologies, carbon capture, utilization, and storage, and we can go into that in more detail. We had a great virtual mission to Canada last week with hundreds of participants, and these, of course, are areas of Canadian strength, so that is something that we should and do play to. One or two last points. Of course, beyond the Green Deal, the other major EU long-term goal is digital transformation. And we find that where those two intersect, we find Canadian companies doing very well because of Canada's strength in clean tech and in digital industries. And here we're talking about smart cities, smart grids. So Canadian companies are already performing well there, and we expect that to continue. Let me, as a last point, just mention I think that's also very important to take note of the update of the EU's industrial strategy for Europe that was published on the 5th of May, because that gives a very clear indication of how the EU plans to respond to the pandemic, to supply chains, that they are looking for partners. They want to diversify, to put it very briefly, from China. They want to do more with like-minded countries. And here, of course, the United States is in focus because of the new re-engagement in this field, but definitely there's an opportunity for Canada there. So we should grasp that and we should move quickly to make the most of that. So that strategy looks at value chains, a focus on green steel and cooperation. So those are the things I wanted to highlight. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Peter. I think that was a great, kind of bookend to the various presentations that we've heard, starting off with the work that Hy2Gen has been doing in Quebec, the Quebec marketplace to the European Union. And I just want to kind of recap things very, very quickly here, because I want to make sure that we dedicate enough time for the Q&A session, which I'm hoping that the audience members, you've either typed in your questions, you're ready to go. And from a confidentiality perspective, we're not going to release your name or your organization, so it'll be purely confidential. I'll ask the questions that are coming in to the various speakers, and we'll have a dialogue in that case. But I think what's important is that the opportunities are ripe, the drivers are in place, there is commercial interest, there is investment interest, there's capital in place. And I think now we have an ecosystem that's brought together with various multipliers that are looking to connect and build off of the success that they've had, to share lessons learned, to build long-term partnerships, to not make enemies in the future, so to speak. But I think now the conditions are right. The business and the investment climates are ripe for investment and for doing business. We've got countries that have done business together with one another. And I think now moving forward to attain the Sustainable Development Goals and to ensure a future for our future generations, my kids, their kids in the future, there will be a need for wastewater management. There will be a need for air pollution control, advanced recycle, soil remediation, onshore wind, biomass, geothermal resources. You know, my face can turn blue just talking about the exciting opportunities. But I think the key is to drill it down, to build the relationship, see where the linkages and the alignment fits, and then from there, leverage the resources that are in place, leverage these ecosystems that are there. So with that, I'm going to thank again our panelists for great presentations. Please stay with us because we will have Q&As coming in. And I'm just waiting for the questions to come in. So please don't be shy for those of you that are in the audience. We are waiting for your questions. So let me just bear with me 22 seconds here as I look through the platform to see if there are questions coming in. Okay. I'm seeing some people may be shy to ask questions. You know,
I'm happy to
again,
chime in with a few comments, Omar. I'm
sure.
I'm sure we can
Go
all
ahead,
riff
Jeanette.
a little bit here. Everyone's
Sure.
got so much
Yeah.
to say, and I know Cyril had some other comments as well. I just
Go ahead.
one of the things that I think we can all recognize is that all of us on this call are trying to find the best mechanisms to make it as efficient as possible to connect industry with innovators. And on Foresight's side, and I know I'd love to hear what others are working on as well, that's why we have created some specific streams of acceleration, if you will. So our Water Next initiative, it was great to hear you bring up water, Omar, because sometimes people don't necessarily connect GHG reduction with water, but at the end of the day, water is one of our most precious resources and it cannot be excluded from the conversations. And so we actually mapped out 430 innovators across Canada who are tackling different water challenges so that it's an easy resource for our partners at the Trade Commissioner Services and other similar entities who are trying to help. Again, net goal is to tackle climate change, but of course, you know, climate change is good business, and there's obviously an economic driver that's going to be part of that conversation as well.
That's actually a good point. Jeanette, I actually have a question here, and it goes by this. What are some specific resources or programs that are available to Canadian SMEs today? For example, EU research collaboration or funding opportunities. I don't know, Jeanette, if you wanted to, take a stab at that, or Peter Bauer.
Yeah, and then I'll pass it to Peter. Just really quickly, you know, so when we're supporting our ventures, we're always introducing them to different partners, whether it is our Trade Commissioner Service, Export Development Canada, the Global Affairs. So we do it through existing networks. And of course, also being part of the International Clean Tech Network, which is very, you know, at the end of the day, it's quite European focused right now. As the EU is putting different programs and initiatives together, the SMEs can partner with ventures in Europe to have more access to those resources and opportunities. Peter.
Which Peter? I certainly
Bauer.
have a comment.
Go ahead, Mr. Hayes.
Thank you so much. If I may add to the discussion. So for Canadian SMEs, there are a slew of, as Jeanette is suggesting, funding entities out there, many of which are either new, particularly because of COVID, like this Net Zero Accelerator Fund for mostly for large companies, but there are also a number of them for smaller companies, depending on the sector you're focusing on, your technology offer, and where you are in the country. So for example, and we can share this afterwards from our PowerPoint with participants, there's the FCM Green Infrastructure Fund that although it identifies with cities, it looks for private sector involvement to innovate in the various technologies around water quality improvement or reduced air and water pollution or recycling systems or minimize waste, whatever it may be. So that's one example. And then there are a number of other funds that we identify with that I think are very supportive of SMEs. There's the Clean Tech Demonstration Fund, that's $400 million through SDTC, which is a federal fund. The EDC has a number of SME funds for business development. The Business Development Canada has a series of financing to support SME clean tech specifically. There's Innovative Solutions Canada that supports scale up and growth of Canada's innovators and entrepreneurs. That's federally sponsored. And then regionally, you have entities like ERA, the Emissions Reduction Alberta organization that has just over $600 million worth of funds, and has already spent about $4.5 billion since 2009 for SMEs and mid caps. And the list goes on and on and on. BDC has their capital intensive accelerating funds. We've got the SIF, the Strategic Innovation Fund, that's a couple of $1 billion with 4 funding streams for SMEs, for anything from large scale investments to advanced industrial research, relevant to CETA, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Lots out there.
Peter,
yeah.
Peter, I'm afraid I apologize. I have to cut you off just because we're getting peppered with the questions. So people, I asked for the questions, throw it at us. We want a lot of questions. So with that, Mr. Bauer in Berlin, if I could just kind of, move to the next question, because I think Peter Hayes did a really good job complimenting Jeanette in terms of answering the funding question. So if I may, here's a question. Now, with the idea of carbon tariffs starting to be discussed more openly by governments and stakeholders, do the speakers feel tariffs will increase, delay, or have a neutral effect on the adoption of clean tech? What effect may these tariffs have on clean tech trade and investment in Canada and in Europe? And finally, does CETA leave room for future adoption of carbon tariffs? I know this is a heavily loaded question, but I know that one of our panelists, Cyril Dufault-Sanso, has put up his hand to answer this question. So Cyril, if you may, go ahead. I leave the floor to you.
Yeah, thank you, Omar. I will answer very quickly to that question. Carbon tariffs are one of the main driver of my business. So it will penalize fossil fuel-based economy, and especially fossil fuels, and it will enable the competitiveness of clean fuels and green hydrogen. So that's the main driver. What we feel today is that the trend is increasing and it will not drop down anymore. If you just compare the price of the ton of CO2 today in Europe is close to 50 euro. It was 28 months ago, and all the experts, at least in Europe, they say that it should be around 100, at least 100 in 2030 and 300 in 2040 per ton. In Canada, you have the federal government that has, or at least a court that has written in the stone $170 in 2030. So this will push forward clean techs.
Thank you very much, Cyril. Our next question is, now my company is developing technologies related to producing GHG emission-free energy for power and heating. Now, the market currently for this IP resides in the EU. Are there any thoughts about connecting with companies that are willing to invest or be partners? So panelists, is there anyone who wishes to put their hand up for this one?
Sorry, can you repeat the question, Omar, just for clarification?
Sure. So my company, X, is developing technologies. My green company is developing technologies related to producing GHG emission-free energy for power and heating. Now, the market for this IP is in the EU. Are there any thoughts about connecting with companies willing to invest or be partners?
So I may comment on this, Omar. So
go ahead, please.
Typically, let's say large companies such as Saipem will not develop low TRLs like TRL 1, 2, 3, 4. It's only when you get to 6, 7 that it will trigger their interest. So if you're at that stage, give us a call and we can talk.
Ditto.
Okay, great. And just as a reminder to the audience, everyone's profile, contact details. You have the ability to connect one-on-one with the speakers. If you're having trouble reaching the speakers, you could always reach back to the EUCCAN, and they'll be able to connect you directly to the various panelists. The next question is, if an EU tech company wishes to expand into Canada, where should they begin their research into the feasibility of their innovations? In fact, if they are even innovative in our marketplace. So I'm gonna put a plug to that, market guide that I was trying to forward the link to. I think that's a good starting point, but maybe I'll hand it off to Jeanette and then Peter Hayes, and then maybe even Peter Bauer in Berlin.
Just really quickly, I mean, that's what we do. We have a lot of companies that when they want to do business in Canada, they want to be part of the network and the ecosystem. And so, we're happy to help you navigate which support network is best suitable for you, whether it's, someone in our partners in Quebec, Ontario, or if you want to focus on the West Coast, we're here to help you navigate.
And just briefly add to that, we like Foresight, we do similar work. There's a lot of unmet demand here in Canada. And if you have a technology that is innovative and speaks to that unmet demand, we would be delighted to search for companies that where we can connect your offering to their unmet need.
And now I just got the bell in my ear from the organizers of the event. We have time for 2 more questions. So I'm going to read off one question and then we'll end it with the last one. So this is directly to Mr. Peter Hayes. You're a popular guy. Maybe it was because you're holding the briefcase of money. I'm not too sure. But Mr. Hayes, can you please elaborate more on the specific challenges and opportunities of the LCBA program? Thank you.
Yeah, so we've already conducted a market assessment of where we think the low-hanging fruit is sectorally and regionally, right across the entire country, from coast to coast to coast, from east to west to north. And we've identified where within those priority 7 sectors, some of the firms exist, that these are large scale and medium scale Canadian firms that are interested and are willing to buy product and services and technologies from the EU. We have a hit list. And that hit list means that we have demand that is sitting there without supply in Canada. We can connect you to that demand by simply registering on our website. And I encourage you to do that with the other panelist organizations as well, because many of us do. We have this challenge process where we connect the buyers and sellers based on very specific requirements on both sides. So delighted to support you in that partnership effort, and please register on our website, on Foresight's website, on the other websites, so that we can help you to begin the process of engaging those Canadian buyers for business opportunity.
Thank you, Peter. Now with that, we have 2 more minutes for the last question. So to the panel in general, are there newer organic water treatment processes becoming available? And are there new options or developments for individual residential self-sufficient water purification? For example, 10-liter shower, etc.
With it's a little hard with context, whether it's a European opportunity or a Canadian opportunity, but I'll share a link to our water innovation roadmap, and there's lots of different ventures doing everything from freshwater to industrial wastewater management to more consumer products. So maybe there'll be something there.
And to that audience member who has submitted the question, thank you very much. And I think as a follow-up, you could follow up with Ms. Jeanette Jackson of Foresight to further kind of crystallize your question and hopefully find an answer to what it is you're looking for. Now, with that, I want to thank everyone who participated in this exciting panel. I'm now getting more excited as we're entering to the lunch period. For those of you, I hope that you enjoyed our session. We had a diverse panel that came from a lens of different backgrounds who brought some great insights, highlighted some challenges, but more specifically talked about the opportunities and really spoke to the uniqueness of the various ecosystems and multipliers that are in our various economies, both the Canadian context. And if you look at Canada, it's not just it is one country, but if you look at it from province to province, you've got multiple countries within a country, so to speak, from a cultural standpoint to the requirements and the needs and the advancement of these various economies in terms of how far advanced they are in terms of their clean tech strategies and the financing that kind of goes together to complement the efforts. You've got government trade officials that are there to support you in Europe and in Canada. You have accelerators and incubators that are here in the Canadian marketplace that have linkages to the European Union. You've got chambers of commerce, and you also have companies that are successfully doing business in both the Canadian and the European market. I think that's a great kind of grouping of presenters and panelists. So please take advantage, build relationships, get to know these people, learn more about what they do on a day-to-day basis, and hopefully you can advance your commercial research interests in the future. Again, thank you to the organizers, and thank you for having me as a moderator.